Welcome to Supercar Driver TV. This is the third episode in a series looking at 90s supercar icons, and in tonight's programme we're going to be looking at the car behind me. I shouldn't really have to tell you what this is, being as it is one of probably the most iconic of all Porsche's road cars and probably of all their race cars, bar Moby Dick. But the producer says I have to tell you anyway. It's a 1996 993 GT2. These cars were developed by Porsche in the mid-90s when they wanted to go racing in that class, and they wanted to develop a road car that could compete at all levels from club motorsport right up to and including Le Mans. At that time they had the 993 Turbo, which they thought would be a good base for that car, and what they wanted to do was take the 993 Turbo, which was a powerful, safe, secure, all-weather supercar, and turn it into something quite different. They kept the body shell, gave the car a bit more power when it was already very fast, took out a lot of weight and ditched the front half of the four-wheel drive system. So what we've ended up with was a car that, rather than weighing 1500 kilos, now weighs 1290 kilos. Instead of 408 horsepower, has 430, a bit more torque, and was rear-wheel drive only. You have to remember that this is back at a time when there was no traction control, no stability control. So we've got a car here that is approximately 150 kilos lighter than a modern GT3. A little bit less horsepower, but considerably more torque. This car develops 540 newton meters of torque. The 991 GT3, only 440 newton meters of torque. So it should be a lot quicker. Porsche will tell you this car will go from 0 to 100 in 8.8 seconds. That doesn't really tell you the whole story, because on the way there you've got to do 3 or 4 gear changes, and of course this is manual gear change and it's a slow gear change. When you're in a gear, the actual rate of acceleration on this car is much quicker than a new 991 GT3. It really is a very fast car on the road. In getting rid of the four-wheel drive and a lot of the weight, Porsche made a car that at the time was nicknamed the Widowmaker. A lot of these cars were crashed. They had a lot of power. The Porsches have great traction, but at the end of the day it's an old design of chassis, probably designed in the late 80s, this chassis, signed off in the early 90s. Trying to put 450 horsepower through it. The handling's not like a modern car. The tyre technology is not like a modern car. A lot of these cars were crashed. As indeed this one was when it was a year or two old and had to be rebuilt. What's the car like to drive? I think it's fantastic fun. Everything's full of feel, everything's full of texture, the brakes, the steering, plenty of texture coming through. Being turbocharged, there's not a great deal of response to the throttle, but it's still good for a turbocharged car, much better than the F40, which was a similar ilk of car from that time. So in 1995, 1996, when Porsche were building these cars, the figure they're supposed to have made is 172, of which you hear that either 6 or 7 were right-hand drive. This is one of them, so it's a very rare car. They made a club sport version and a comfort version. This is the comfort version of the car, which means that inside it's got leather buckets rather than your fire retardant buckets. It's got a little bit of carpet and a little bit of sound deadening, but not a great deal. The main difference in driving the car as opposed to the sport ones is that this car rides a little bit higher. It's maybe 20-25 mil higher than the sport version, and that defines the driving characteristic of this car to me. It now sits high enough on the road just to introduce an element of roll on the cornering, and especially on the transition from one lock to another. You can feel the weight shifting like this, real old school 911 style. And as you turn into a corner, the engine mounts are a lot softer as well than they are on the modern cars with their adjustable engine mount. So you feel, first of all, when you turn in, I can feel the engine move within the engine bay, which then brings the momentum into the body shell, and it does that old-fashioned 911 thing of leaning onto the outside tyre and the whole car starting to yaw around. I think it's a wonderful sensation, but it makes driving the car a more challenging and difficult experience, which I think is great. I'm all for that. It means if I'm turning right and the car's all leaning and yawing to the left, but I then want to turn left, you've got to manage all that movement of weight. And that to me is what defines a 911 driving experience. I've driven plenty of much more modern 911s that they all do that, but to a lesser and lesser extent. Up to a 991 GTS is the newest I've driven. Hardly does that at all. but the old 993 GT2 here, it's got such a pendulous backside, coupled with the amount of power it's got, and I think that's what got a lot of people into a lot of trouble back in the day with it. I think it's an absolutely fantastic car. I love the looks of it. Those riveted on wheel arches, they're probably what to define the car to most people and turn it into such an icon. But of course, being only 6 or 7 of them in this country, very few people have actually driven one. I'm really, really pleased to be able to tell you all that it looks like a hardcore car, looks tough as nails, like it's going to do you in. Driving it, it's much the same. It feels like it's going to do you in. Fantastic. That's what we need in our cars in Supercar Driver.